Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Tuesday, May 10th, 2022 episode of MSP Dispatch, your source for news, community events, and commentary in the MSP channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Tony Francisco. How you doing, Tony?
Excellent, Ray. How you doing today?
Another beautiful day. I can't complain. It's Miami weather. It's nice and breezy, nice and hot. So I assume it'll be raining in about 10 seconds. So how about your part of the world?
Oh, another area of Florida. As you can see, all the hills behind me. It's not. Florida's very flat. If you look over the roof, you can actually see literally Georgia. No, it's gorgeous here today.
I love it. Well, our first story is going to be something I know you're going to have a lot to say about. It's about passwords. So why don't we get into the news? Our first story is an answer to passwords. Ars Technica is reporting that we finally don't have to do passwords. We don't have to do password lists. We don't have to do TOTP or SMS. And the big three, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, have agreed to support this standard. I guess I should get rid of my YubiKey and go throw it away. Maybe not yet. Maybe not yet. But they have agreed to a standard based on CTAP, Client to Authenticator Protocol. It uses Bluetooth to ensure the phone is near the device that's being authenticated, and that the device that's authenticating is on the actual website that's being authenticated from. That makes it virtually unphishable according to the standard. The encryption key, the cryptography key used on the phone cannot be exported. This claims to be the be-all, end-all. Using fingerprint or your face for authentication on the phone to finally authenticate against the service. Originally only adopted by Microsoft, Google, and Apple, we assume that this will be extended to other services, but the one service to rule them all. Tony, there's no end to MFA mechanisms. Do we really need another one?
Oh, there's so many questions I have about this. So when you said YubiKey, for everyone who doesn't know what a YubiKey is, we all have them in the IT, or at least the very least those that are secure from a security perspective, very conscious of the situation. But security is really an add-on, a bolt-on to a lot of the architectures that are implemented out there. And it fascinates me how it's not from the ground up built with security first. That being said, the new security measures that are taken are usually, hey, let's plug something in to address this. Let's text a passcode. All of these things can be hacked in some capacity, but what's happening more and more is they're adding a biometric factor to that. So it's not just something you have, it's something that you are. So that fingerprint, the facial recognition, the biometric component is something that's incredibly difficult to duplicate. And in a combination of something that you have almost, well, at least today, the flawless solution, impenetrable. I don't know if this is the end all, because I think even if it does address the singular one-off security concern, what about the password it's correlating to from the phone or mobile device to the service you're trying to enter? What about that static password? Can that be used and exploited at another angle on the back end? Is this just one point of entry we're trying to secure when you've got another 50 holes on the back end? There's so many questions I have about this, but
Well, that's the thing, right? It's supposed to be no passwords at all. This is supposed to be person identification versus a password identification, which makes it inherently more secure. Now, we won't go into the dozens of movies we've seen where they cut off your finger or take out your eyeball, which always makes for good action flicks.
Ray goes right for the extreme of that.
Right, exactly. But I do like the fact that it's a standard that's already been agreed to by the three majors. I like it's a standard that, is supposedly much easier to adopt. The real question becomes adoption, right? Because that's where the real problem is. We know TOTP is more secure than SMS MFA. Push is better than SMS, right? The FIDO is better than push. But Bank of America, I'll call out one of my banks. Bank of America still doesn't support FIDO. You still have to use SMS. Like, how do we get this, any of these, how do we get this just finally pushed out and adopted by the masses?
Well, I think we're running into another problem, which is You mentioned B of A, for example. Let's say this biometric standard applies to B of A. What about all of the other things that don't address this particular standard? What about a website, a simple website where there's username and password? You're still getting into a password manager situation, which means that at some point it begs the question, what happens if you lose your password? Well, in a password management scenario, you have recovery tools. But in this particular scenario, if you lose your device, what is your recovery mechanism since there is no password? What is the biometric authentication? Does that mean the vendor is now going to be completely bombarded by support calls from the end user to retrieve those passwords? A lot of questions, a lot of unanswered possibilities, but I think there are so many values to if the community as a whole, the industry as a whole, finally getting together to address a major, major security issue.
And that's the thing, right? Like there's no end to people trying to take your credentials, trying to take your identity, trying to take your or ransomware your devices. Thankfully, the U.S. government is coming up with their own strategies. Tony, you have a story about that?
I do. Lockbit 2.0 and Conti dominate ransomware attack activity, as illustrated in MSPalert.com and Reuters.com. The latest trend that's been occurring is ransomware has been prolific. The number of victims of ransomware attacks in North America and Europe numbered 283 in March of this year alone. That's a 53% spike from the prior month. Lockbit 2.0 and Conti were responsible for 59% of the total attacks reported in March. But that is changing drastically because the evolution of ransomware that is extended from other types of ransomware that we've been reporting on here in this show has had such a dramatic impact that the government is now getting involved. Per Reuters, the United States on Friday offered a reward of $15 million for information on the Russia-based Conti ransomware group, which has been blamed for cyber extortion attacks worldwide. The State Department, Ned Price, has been talking about this in detail. He says that the reward comprises of $10 million for just the identification of the location of the leaders of this group and $5 million for the information that results in the arrest of anyone conspiring with Conti. Ray, who is the best target for this incentive? Is this the right incentive to apply some accountability to these particular groups? Is this too broad? Are they just going to be flooded with white noise of, hey, I know who they are, and it's not going to address the real persons of interest? Or is this going to really target the hacking groups themselves, incentivize them, which of course could uncover some other, malicious groups to, hey, hand in this particular group that's attacking the globally industries and bringing industries to their knees with ransomware.
This reminds me of John Walsh, America's Most Wanted, with all the tip lines and all the, these X amount of rewards. I would love to see, these rewards, how effective are they in actually bringing about justice, right? I mean, they're effectively making, they're effectively enabling the public to become bounty hunters. And that's not a new thing, right? These are conventions that have been around for ages, but the people they're going to be savvy enough to track down these malicious actors, you're basically targeting hacker groups in the US and abroad. Typically the people that now you say we can't attack another country, right? We can't attack another country because that's an act of warfare. That's already been set in stone by our laws. But then we're saying go out and find these identities, and the people that are going to do this are the same people that are going to want to perform these attacks. I wonder if they're opening Pandora's box by doing this, or if it's just another gesture, right? Are they giving up and saying, we can't find this on our own, we need other people to help? Or are we just saying we're putting out this reward because it looks good for the public? I wonder how effective it's actually going to be. And if if anybody has comments on that, I'd love to see it, especially any stats on do rewards work when bringing any kind of criminals to justice. I can't remember the last time, we saw on TV, an Ed McMahon check being given out to somebody, bringing some kind of criminal justice. It's interesting, at least. Tony, are you going to go hunting?
Well, if Ed McMahon is opening up Publishers Clearinghouse again and bringing me a huge check to my door, which probably doesn't, resonate with half the audience, trust me, I'd go out hunting. That being said, I'm also wondering about the dystopian side, which is, is this going to be another Big Brother where somebody isn't hacking, but they're playing around and it's nothing malicious, and they get turned in or reported for something? Is this going to turn to a Big Brother Handmaid's Tale, horrible story by the very dystopic, scenario where everybody's telling on everybody, and the evolution that occurs from exploration and attempts to do new things is wildly stunted. There's so many sides of this, but accountability needs to be applied to these Russian hacking groups that are causing devastation around the world. I'm really interested to see if this incentive is the best way to move forward. But at the end of the day, accountability is everything. Ray, do you have anything about accountability that you want to talk about?
Absolutely I do. I almost, the segment's getting very, very close to becoming a grinds my gears type segment. And, I'm not trying to make it about that. It's just, we keep seeing this over and over. On May 4th, on my birthday, ThreatLocker sent out a notice advising that they were seeing an increase in attacks, and we'll show on the screen the actual attacks that we're mentioning. On May 4th, ThreatLocker sent out an email to their security alerts channel, a ThreatLocker security bulletin reading, "Attackers using BCD Edit to bypass security software." It reads, "We have observed a large increase in attackers using companies and MSPs' remote management tools over the last few days. While in most of these cases these tools had dual-factor authentication, attackers were still able to access them and use them to launch the cyber attacks." Now, at almost exactly the same time as the security bulletin, CRN released an article warning of exactly the same thing, with an interview with Danny Jenkins, the CEO of ThreatLocker, citing several ThreatLocker customers, notifying that if you had been using ThreatLocker, this attack would not have taken place or would not have been successful. As you can imagine, citing that your RMM had been compromised despite the presence of MFA, piqued the interest of several security researchers around the MSP world. The ThreatLocker channel on MSP Geek immediately became inundated with questions, requesting sources, requesting what exactly they had seen. If RMMs were indeed breached, this was to the level of the same thing as the Kaseya incident back on July 4th of last year. And although we've been waiting for it, it is a scary thought. Within 24 hours of that email being released, Ben Jenkins, the director of cybersecurity over at ThreatLocker, had posted an update. The update stating, "ThreatLocker strives to keep our partners informed about potential weaknesses in their environment and create built-in policies to help mitigate them." The above email was sent in response to ThreatLocker observing an increased use of the BCD Edit tool across our customer base. The tool was called from various management and remote access tools, and in some case was used to reboot the computers in safe mode. ThreatLocker does not believe there is a 0-day vulnerability in any tool that has led to an increase in attacks. Almost immediately after, ThreatLocker produced a webinar where they answered questions pertaining to the attacks and gave data. And during that webinar, the attacks that were listed were that they saw an increase in the use of BCD Edit on Windows systems. It should be noted that BCD Edit is an included application in all Windows installs, has several legitimate uses. I did ask specifically, were any of these devices compromised? And the answer was no. What they saw was there was an increase in the use of BCD Edit. They reached out to those MSPs, found that they had RMMs with MFA, but there was no actual correlation to the RMM being used to actually run these BCD Edit changes. Tony, with these kind of attacks and warnings, when you have MSPs that are already on edge, worrying about the next big breach, and the vendor turning their story around, saying originally it's your RMM and your MFA has been compromised and now has nothing to do with your RMM or MFA. Tony, MSP is already terrified about the next big breach. They're terrified about when their RMM is going to get breached. Everybody in the security space pretty much agrees it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When a story like this comes out, doesn't matter that it's been retracted or modified or edited. What do you think it does to the anxiety or sensitivity of that MSP?
Ray, you're hitting it right on the head. Everyone is hypersensitive about security, about the ransomware that MSP Dispatch is reporting on. Every single episode is a new security vulnerability breach. MSP Dispatch is talking about the ransomware pattern and the data trends showing clearly a massive increase in security risks. Everyone is hypersensitive to that. And to touch on it with something that almost looks like clickbait is dangerous. And are you reading the same thing as me? Because I feel like the first question I should ask you is, if this is from, I think it was a BCD edit, anything with BCD edit is affected. My question is, what is BCD edit installed on?
So BCD edit's installed on every single Windows installation period. I mean, it's tantamount to, we've seen an increase in the use of Notepad. Now, I want to be clear, we want all sides to be covered here. I did reach out to Ben Jenkins. He had a scheduling conflict. They did host the webinar, which I attended and got some pieces of data. And we have invited Ben Jenkins to come on and give their side of the story on a future episode of Dispatch, to which we'll continue to try to coordinate. But my concern is, they keep referring to this as attacks despite not a single iota of evidence that any device was compromised. There are legitimate uses for BCD edit. And I want to be clear, the use of BCD edit to get a device to go into safe mode so it bypasses all security measures and compromise the system, that is a legitimate attack vector. That is something that's been reported on for the last several years. And you don't even need to use BCD edit. You can edit the registry to do the same thing. You don't need to launch the editor to accomplish this. So there's better ways to do this. That can also be done from your RMM or from PowerShell or from anywhere else. I hate to say that this was frivolous marketing. I hate to say that this was exaggerated on the marketing side, because this, per ThreatLocker, per their webinar, this only went to their security channel. Despite we have several parties have identified themselves that they received the notifications and have never had a trial of ThreatLocker, have never signed up for the security bulletins, and they did receive it. Danny Jenkins, the CEO, was very clear. A security researcher within the organization wrote this up. Danny Jenkins looked it over and agreed to this and had it sent out. So this was not a marketing play. This was their version of a legitimate security concern. Also, other security researchers in the space, Sophos, Barracuda, Huntress, many others were asked, are you seeing the same thing? And not a single other entity was able to identify any such increase in attacks using this vector. So it's important that we cover all the sides here, but it seems a little bit of Chicken Little, I guess, for lack of a
that was
better word.
my question. Is this clickbait? Is this hyperbole? Is there a correlation somewhere that maybe we're not seeing? So I'd be really interested if Mr. Jenkins could get on and for a little bit more clarity specific to our audience, because right now I'm not seeing the correlation. I'm seeing, hey, let's through a FUD factor, really incentivize people to crack down even harder on security. They happen to be a big player in the security industry. Are you overstepping?
Absolutely. And I think the lesson that we can take away from this, because there's always something we can learn, and this is for the media, because CRN was burned by this. MSP Alliance had to issue retraction as well. There's a fine line of judgment, which is we have the data early enough that we need to act on it, but are we too early where we don't have all the data to act on? And I can tell you, we struggle with this as a news organization. We struggle with this as well. This is why we didn't cover it earlier. We wanted to make sure we had all the data. But do your due diligence. That's the best I can say. If you're an MSP that was affected by this, please hit us up in the comments. Please reach out to us on Twitter or shoot us an email, news@mspmedia.tv. If you think it was a good thing and if you think they did the right thing, we also want to hear that. We want to hear all sides of it so we can make sure that everyone is represented carefully. Tony, we got some notable mentions coming up. What stories didn't make it to the big stories?
Notable mentions per Reuters, the U.S. agriculture equipment manufacturer AGCO said on Friday that more ransomware attacks, were affecting operations at some of its production facilities. The dealer said that tractor sales have been stalled during crucial planting season. Now, keep in mind that dealers have already been struggling to keep up with orders that were already backlogged. These ransomware attacks have targeted food and fuel companies in the United States in the recent years, including the Colonial Pipelines, Oil Network, and meat processing company JBS, as we have all heard on. In fact, we've actually reported right here. At least 3 grain handlers in the Midwest were hit with ransomware attacks in the recent reports as well. That's a notable mention. It's affecting everyone. Ransomware is real, and it's a huge concern of us. That's why we're reporting as much as we can on it, and very specifically the vendors associated with them. So, Ray, that's the notable mention. It's huge. I wish it didn't make notable mention. I wish it was a main story, but there are so many things happening in our industry. So it's important to cover as much as we can.
Absolutely. Speaking of what we want to cover, there's a lot of community events coming up. Let's put those up on the screen. Starting with the MSP Sales Revolution in Orlando, Florida. That's a live event today and tomorrow. There's the virtual event today, the IT Ops Security Summit presented by Ninja One. I will definitely be attending to that. Jason Slagle, who's been on MSP Dispatch several times before, he is also going to be presenting at the event on May 11th. Tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, National Society of IT Service Providers all-member meeting. And then on Thursday, the Tech Bar podcast featuring Alex Farley and Connor Swalm, the Captain's episode. And then on Friday, as always, 10 a.m., we will be recording MSP Dispatch with the weekly wrap-up. And that takes us out. Thank you, MSP audience. We appreciate you. We hope these stories are interesting. And hit us up in the comments. Is there something we didn't cover? Do you want to hear about more tractors? Maybe we want to hear about more of that. I'm certainly interested.
We love hearing from you guys, all of you.
Absolutely. Tony, what do you got coming up for this week?
This week, getting a lot of projects done that I was unable to finish because I was reading about all this ransomware attack. That's why I'm finishing up my projects, and I think we're going to have some pretty good stories coming up. I'm hearing that there's a lot of interesting events in process we're all researching right now.
Always love to hear that. Well, until Friday, MSP family, take care of yourselves and each other.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.